Yes, I believe in fate. I believe that from the start we were meant to be together. When I was 8 years old, a small boy with freckles and tufty brown curls ran over to me during recess. I was hanging upside down on the jungle gym when he strode over. The first thing I saw were his shoes, covered in dirt, then his faded Spider-Man tee. The new kid. He had spent all day sulking with his arms crossed and refused to talk to any of the other kids, so I was confused to talk to any of the other kids, so I was confused why. Let's be best friends. His wide eyes and scowling mouth told me I didn't have a choice. I didn't have any friends. I was friends with a girl called Rena, but she laughed at me when I said I talked to trees. The new kid definitely looked like he would laugh at me if he discovered I talked to trees. Clenched jaw and intense eyes I couldn't look away from. When I ignored him, he joined me, swinging backwards off the jungle gym, hooking his feet under the bars. I'm Moss. The new boy turned to me with a grin. I giggled because he looked funny upside down. His hair looked like it was swallowing his face. I'm your new best friend. Millie. I held out my hand for a high five. Okay. 2 days later, another girl joined us. Errol. Tiny orange pigtails and a voice so soft I could barely hear her. She surprised me by jumping onto the jungle gym with ease, throwing out her arms and dangling with us. I don't have any friends, she whispered. So, I'm going to be friends with you two. A year later, when the three of us were on summer vacation, sitting in my yard making mud pies, my mom appeared holding a boy's hand. The boy glared at us, kicking at the ground. I liked his bright red hair. This is Rachel. I saw him playing alone, so I figured I'd bring him over to play. Mom never has a face in my memories, so I pretend she's smiling. Her appearance is always more shadow than human. The boy's cheeks turned tomato red, and Moss burst into giggles. He held out his hand, and Richal's expression softened, his bottom lip wobbling. Sure. Do you want to make mud pies with us, stupid head? Richal crossed his arms. I'm not a stupid head, he grumbled. But he did slowly kneel down next to me, grab a handful of dirt, and throw it at Moss. That moment made us. 4 9-year-olds becoming best friends forever. Then, at 15, we finally cemented it. Drunk on wine coolers and spread out under darkness. Clammy, entangled legs and unsure kisses. We declared our love for each other. Something more than friendship. Something that set off butterflies wriggling in my chest that made my heart ache. At 27, I was marrying my true love. Standing in front of a mirror made of crystal, I smoothed down my dress that sculpts me. A beautiful white gown that pools at my feet. I have to swallow down hysterical giggles creeping up my throat, allowing myself one single squeal, while a maid runs a brush through my long, tangled curls. I feel like a princess, I whisper, bouncing on inexpensive glass slippers. Millicent. Odara violently tugs my hair into a braid, her nimble fingers intricately moving through each strand. When she's finished, she carefully lays my veil on top of my head, and again, I can't resist a giggle. What did I tell you? Odara grips my chin, forcing me to look at her. I do, but I can't stop grinning, tears stinging my eyes. While I am happy, they are painful. Mistress Begalia's order was to make sure you do not cry until your wedding vows are completed. Her tone, as usual, is a lecture. Do you understand me? Have a day off. I wink at her in the mirror, and she rolls her eyes. Odara, I'm getting married. I collapse into giggles as she drags me from the mirror, but I glimpse my bare feet sticking from my dress. Wait, something sharp fills me for a moment, like poison, freezing me in place. I stare down at my toes. But they are so dirty. I can see filth clinging to my toenails. I blink rapidly, my gut twisting, bile filling my mouth. Where did my shoes? Mills, are you decent? A voice yells from outside, cutting through my thoughts. Step inside here, Mass, and it will be the last thing you do, Odara grumbles, straightening my dress. He pokes his head in, anyway, a mop of corkscrew curls. He's half-dressed, his tie hanging off his collar, 5 o'clock shadow bleeding across a freshly washed face. He grins at me. Hi, he winks before being yanked back. Mass, what did I tell you? Another maid screeched from outside. Where is your suit? You have toothpaste on your mouth. Young man, what am I going to do with you? Mistress Begalia was very clear when she said, unshaven. I heard him being dragged away and shoved into the nearest bathroom. I can't resist a giggle, ignoring Odara's scrutinizing glare. I twist back around, risking another look. My shoes are on my feet, perfect glass slippers. I roundhouse kicked in my dress just to make sure. Millie, what are you doing? Odara groans. All right. She spins me around to face her. Odara smiles. But she never smiles. You're ready, Millicent. I nod, nerves twisting my gut as she pulls me from my room. Can I ask you a question? I whisper as we descend a staircase of diamonds. Odara doesn't look at me when we step out onto the dunes. An arch of flowers and white picket chairs filled with shadows await us. I can feel the soft sand beneath my feet, but I am wearing shoes. Of course, Odara hums as our wedding begins. What is it? I choose my words very carefully, moving towards the love of my life. She stands in crystal shallow water, sculpted in white, long blonde hair bleeding into the water. Begalia. My question unravels in my throat when I see her smile. Bathed in radiant light, Begalia is the sun. She is my sun. We are gathered here today, a man begins, when I join the others at the altar. Richal and Maz wear white suits. Arl and I wear matching dresses. Begalia stands in front of us. She grabs our hands separately as we speak our vows. Do you, Begalia Soren, take Millicent Reed, Rachel Simmons, Moss Hollow, and Arl Atlas to be your lawfully wedded husbands and wives? Begalia grins. Her smile is so bright. I do. The man turns to us. And do you? The words spill from my lips before he can finish. I do, Moss smiles. I do, Moss smiles. I do. Rachel nods. Arl's eyes fill with tears. Millie! See? The voice is like a knife cutting through me. Suddenly, reality splits apart. Sirens fill my ears. Men and women in black swamp me. A woman stumbles over to me with tear-stained cheeks. She grabs me like she knows me, cradling my face. Millie, the woman sobs. Sweetie, it's your mom. It's going to be okay. I stagger back, words choking my throat. Millie. The woman's grip tightens. I've found you. I pull away, stumbling back into moss. Look at me, she whispers. That girl, she jerks her head at Begalia. She took you away when you were 18. You told me the girl in your classes was crazy, and I didn't believe you. Her trembling hands flit through my hair, but her fingers tickle. No, I find my words, but they are suffocating. The woman slaps me, and I see red. Bright, intense red. The world jerks around, and the crystal shallows of the sea bleed into rough concrete. I am not standing on a beach. I'm in an abandoned warehouse. I stare down at my toes. My filthy, bloodied toes, chains cutting into my wrists. My dress is half of a torn curtain, cruelly stapled to my breasts. I slowly run my hands over my head. But I feel nothing, only my scorched, rugged skin. My wedding ring is melded to my finger. If I didn't wear it, Begalia would. She would. A raw screech tore from me. My breath ripped from my lungs. I remember how painful the chains are, slicing into me. I remember I'm not allowed to cry. I'm not allowed to cry. I'm not allowed to cry. Millie. Mom. Something inside me splinters. Oh, God, my mom. Mom grasps hold of my shoulders, her nails digging in. Sweetie, her shuddery breaths tickle me. Where are the others, she demands. Your friends, Millie. I am covered in blood, and Mom's grip hurts. Red paints me like I am its canvas, staining and ingrained into my skin, into all of me. My gaze finds Moss, Aral, and Richal still standing in halo light. I am standing on cruel concrete. While they join hands, walking away from me into the shadows, Mom jerks my head towards her. Where are they? Mother would tell us about the deluge when she was in one of her moods. She would say how the day she gave birth to Jinyu, the levee broke and washed away every house within 8 miles of the river. All except our house, being high enough on the hill to only need to replace the sheetrock up to my height as a 2-year-old at the time. She lamented the loss of the neighbors who never rebuilt and the orchard behind the house, which died after the water submerged the tree trunks. Now the trees stood as monoliths of death next to empty fields. Black, rotting fingers of branches grasping at the sky that got grayer as Jinu and I got older. Mother talked about it like it was our fault, but only when she was in one of her moods. That was only when she had run out of pills and decided to come out of her bedroom. Father would return from job sites late in the evening, smelling of slag and iron and aftershave, to replenish her pills, along with the milk and the freezer meals. He rarely spoke to us, like some mute ghost that eventually appeared in the middle of the night and the early morning to make a tool belt and work boots appear and disappear. Despite what was haunting us, most of our childhood was as normal as two boys on their own could have had. We rode the bus to school together. We played on the land around our house together. We cut each other's hair. We washed each other's clothes. We washed each other's clothes. We learned how the world worked together. And we learned how to fight together. Jainu and I got bused to a nice public school in town since we were in the district. We stood out like herons in a pond against the pressed uniforms and expensive shoes with our sneakers full of holes and rumpled shirts. As clean as we tried to keep ourselves, there was only so much a bar of soap and a buzz cut could do. I don't remember what most of our fights with other kids were about. Usually, a few of them just made fun of us, and then we beat them until they'd shut up. One particular fight, though, was about woodpeckers. I was in the 3rd grade, and we were learning about birds. Miss Anderson, some blonde young 20-something, was playing bird noises and having us identify them. I knew them all, given I lived outside on summers and weekends, but I didn't speak up. Finally, we got to a knocking sound. It was somewhat familiar to me, but wasn't right. Can someone name that sound? Yes, Chelsea, a woodpecker. That's right. I knew woodpeckers because their incessant banging acted as my alarm clock every morning for half the year. Their knocking echoed through the dead orchard with a hollow bass and a rattling that made my skin crawl, but these were absent on the recording. It was only natural that I mumbled under my breath. That isn't what woodpeckers sound like. What was that, Wilrad? Said Miss Anderson. I had learned to speak up when questioned. That isn't what woodpeckers sound like, ma'am. Oh, but it is, Wilrad. These are professional recordings. Perhaps you'd like to bring in a recording of your own sometime to share with the class. The class laughed, and I just looked at my desk. And remember, Wilrad, the word is isn't, not ain't. More laughter. The snot-nosed jerk behind me kicked my chair. Jinu and I gave him and a few others a good beating behind the playground at recess for that. We knew how to not leave marks, and eventually, they learned not to tell on us. It was strictly physical. As Jinu and I sat on the swings for a moment when the bell rang, he fidgeted with the 2 nails tied with a string Father had welded for him as a necklace. It looked like a letter in a made-up language. Why'd we fight 'em? They don't know what woodpeckers sound like. He grunted in reply, and we headed back inside. We weren't stupid. It was just that, instead of picture books and PBS, we had an old stack of Sportsman magazines with pages torn out and the warning labels on tobacco products. I learned words from the soap operas that blared through the door of Mother's bedroom, and Jinu learned to read off the back of a cereal box. But more than that, we learned by being outside. We had trails marked through the savannas to our tree forts. We made a map to the old stone viaduct, and we made fishing poles out of sticks and twine. Life was most simple when we were covered in dirt, halfway through building some contraption we had seen in a book from school. We would play after school into the waning hours of light, then run home as fast as we could before the skunk ape got us. He was real, all right. The debate over his existence was the catalyst for more fights at school, but our experience had shown him to be real. We even knew where he lived, the orchard of dead trees behind our house. There were nights we ran parallel to those trees and caught the glint of his yellow eyes. Sometimes the wind changed, and our paths were drenched in the smell of rot and death. The orchard always smelled like that. The skunk ape was no friendly forest protector. He was a killer who preyed on the flesh of living things and relished the stench of their corpses. That's why he loved the rotting trees of the orchard and its poisoned soil. His heralds were the woodpeckers, who banged against those trees with delight that more might die. Part of the reason nothing grew back in the orchard was the consistent flooding that filled it and drowned any new plants. They had never rebuilt the levee, probably in an attempt to kill the skunk ape. Father didn't have to tell us twice not to go there. We had seen the warning take form each spring when our stomping grounds were submerged. We knew the orchard was cursed, but the cursed and haunted has an allure to young boys that is hard to explain. A fascination with monsters starts to form, and soon, trails cut closer to the orchard. Our fears by my 4th grade year were morbid curiosities, until the day we pissed off the skunk ape. There was a savanna next to the orchard that had grass at least 2 feet above our heads. It shook and rattled in the wind like it was hollow. Ginu and I would follow game trails through it to make mazes for ourselves to get out of. We'd search for bird nests to see if we could find eggs or chicks. One day, while army crawling our way along a trail, Ginu found a gun. It was a handgun, semi-automatic, big and black. The only guns we had ever seen were in the sportsman's magazines, so we were wicked excited when we found it. "I bet someone was out here hunting and dropped it," Ginu said, reverently holding it like it was a crucifix. "Maybe they were hunting the skunk ape," I said, half joking. "You think you could kill him with a gun this small?" "Well, that depends on how big the bullets are. And how big the skunk ape is. How many bullets do you think it has?" "I don't know. Let me see." He handed it to me, pointed at the ground. I flipped it around in my hands and flipped a switch on one side. I flipped it back on. I pushed a button on the handle. The magazine popped out the bottom. I could see the brass shining out of the slot on the side. "Looks like at least 5. I handed the mag to Ginu. "How many can it hold?" 7, I think." "Cool." I passed him the gun, and he inserted the magazine. "Careful. There's one in the gun already, probably." I pulled back the slide a little to see another shining brass case in the chamber. "Can we keep it?" Ginu said. "Maybe we should ask Father. He won't be home until late. Maybe we could stash it somewhere." "The lean-to? No, it'll rain." "The stone viaduct? Not if it floods. We could put it under the floorboards in our bedroom." "That's a good spot." "How are we going to get it in the house without Mother seeing it?" "Just wait until later tonight. We could hide it under the front porch until then." We sat in silence as our prize lay on the grass. The most interesting things we had ever found were an old oar washed up on a sandbar or an arrowhead by the stone viaduct. "Can we shoot it?" asked Ginu. "We have to save the bullets." "Well, we got 6. Can we shoot 1 apiece? Then we have 4 left." "I'm good with that." "What should we shoot?" We stood and looked around. The grass shortened as it sloped down into the dank darkness of the orchard. "Let's shoot one of them trees." "Oak, how about that one?" Ginu pointed to the nearest one, about the size of a person. "Yeah, that's good. You go first." Ginu held the pistol up with 2 straight skinny arms, imitating the stances we saw in magazines. "Which eye do I close?" "Your right one," I said, "I think." "Oak, you got it?" "Yeah." "Switch off the safety." "Oak, 'kay, I'm doing that." Then squeeze the trigger. Bam! The shot rang out through the orchard as the pistol bucked in Ginu's hand. The woods went silent as we turned to each other, surprised by the noise. Then we turned to the tree. The shot struck the tree at its center about 6 feet above the ground. A large chunk of wood cratered from the round. I was about to turn to Ginu to congratulate him on a great shot and ask for my turn when I saw it. A crimson stream was trickling down the side of the tree, staining the rotten white and brown wood a deep red. The tree was bleeding. The wind changed. It brought with it the stench of death. The forest was silent for a few moments. Then a sound crescendoed over anything living. Heavy running footfalls crunched leaves and squelched mud, and the shot's ringing echo directed them right to us. Ginu and I turned to each other and ran. Ginu dropped the gun into the grass. The hulking thuds shook the ground over our hair-like footsteps. We weaved through grass and trees, the footsteps coming through the orchard to our right. We sprang out of the savanna and into our unkempt yard. As we waded through leaves, the footsteps disappeared. Still, we bounded up the back porch and slammed the screen door behind us before we rounded to the back window and poked our heads over the sill. Not as much as a leaf stirred beyond the window, and the only sound came from our labored breathing. The slamming screen door had woken Mother. After half an hour, she yelled down the stairs to heat her up something for supper. Jinu and I reluctantly turned from the window and retreated to the safety of the kitchen, drawing the blinds behind us. Despite the warmth of the microwave dinner filling our stomachs, the fear ate at our insides. Sitting at the kitchen table, darkness crept into the corners of the house. As the forks scratched our plates, a crack exploded through the quiet air, a wood knock. It sounded again. A large stick slammed against a tree with inhuman force. Ice ran in our veins as it struck again and again and again. The steady rhythm accompanied us up the stairs to our bedroom. It seemed loud enough to make our teeth rattle as we brushed them. I fished the box cutter I had stolen from Father's tool belt from under my mattress. I held it close as the knocking followed us as we put on our bedclothes and climbed under our scratchy sheets. Then it stopped. We laid awake long into the hours of the night, waiting for another knock. The noise of Father's truck pulling into the driveway must have scared the ape away as the moon was peeking through our window. His footfalls creaked down the stairs as I slid the box cutter under my pillow. Our door cracked open to the solemn face of our father, scattered with stubble, the smell of iron and aftershave following him. It cleansed our minds of the decay and rot of the orchard. "You boys all right?" he said, voice gruff. "Yes, Daddy," we said. "You get to bed now," he said. "You get to bed now," he said. "You have school in the morning." He was about to shut the door when Jinu spoke up as he turned his necklace over in his hands. "Daddy, do trees bleed?" He paused, brow furrowing, but answered plainly. "No, Jinu, they don't have blood. Go to sleep now." His words made it sound like it was the law, and my mind stopped racing after that. He shut the door, and we finally went to sleep. We avoided even passing near the orchard for a whole week. When we finally got up the courage to go back, the gun was gone, and the bleeding tree had tipped over in a storm. The rotten wood had shattered into thousands of soft pieces that still smelled of death. We didn't get close, but some of them were stained red. A woodpecker's hammer echoed through the orchard like laughter and sent us running back to the house. I am utterly tired of seeing the ghastly, thin image of shimmering yellow and stark, pallid skin stalking me through my everyday life. He has been there for us as long as I can remember, just standing slightly out of view, hiding away in my peripheral. Of course, no one believed me whenever I spoke of him. Any time I would turn, his image would step farther behind what my mind was able to see. I stopped speaking of him halfway through what was our third year together. My family quickly grew tired of my incessant complaining about how the luminosity of his clothes gave me a perpetual headache. They had me checked for mental illness, of course, but nothing ever truly came from that. I was mentally clean, besides the so-called hallucination of my banana-themed stalker ever looming behind me. What once was completely fear grew into a persistent splash of daily annoyance whenever I would see him standing vaguely outside of my bedroom window, never breaking his distance as he watched my every move. His preferred stance in my peripheral remained an unwavering constant between us, as was the distance he claimed for the first few years he watched me. This all changed. The morning that I turned 12, my eyes flickered open to the dim morning light that fought its way into my darkened room, struggling to occupy the limited space against a now directly visible, shimmering yellow glow. This marked the first time I was able to make him out clearly. My young mind had filled the blanks of his appearance by inserting images of a storybook character. Unlike him, my haunter was not adorned in a suit, but a foul shirt that was once white, now filthy and yellowed from a mixture of various stains. His pants were a color more reminiscent of mustard, but had such an unmistakable brightness to them. The feature that reignites my fear toward him is the sinister, toothy smile of yellow teeth that contrasted against his chalky white skin and thinning, bleached hair. We stared at each other for a long minute, and he stepped back into the shadows, the whites of his eyes cutting through the darkness toward me. My mother pushed the door open to encourage me to get ready for the day, not seeing the horror standing mere feet from us both. My eyes remained locked on his as they followed me around the room. I quickly grabbed a few clothes and rushed into the sanctuary of the hallway bathroom. With a quick movement, I ripped the shower curtain to the side and was relieved to see he had not followed me in. Just then, I heard the creak of the floors and saw the familiar glow come from beneath the crack in the door. After that day, he remained a healthy 6 or so feet away from me, following me to the library, standing in the back of the tram, or hiding in the soft shadows at my lecture hall. We played this game for the following years. I quickly grew accustomed to his burning stare and tried to go back to ignoring his existence once again. The color yellow became one I most despised as its sickening light burned my retinas the longer my life moved on. The distance between us became exhausting as every year he inched ever closer toward me. Around the middle of my teens, he began to speak to me during the night. His voice was not in a tone compatible with the strength of my ears compared to the strength of my ears compared to the space between us. Low whispers began to keep me awake until exhaustion took hold and ripped me away to the realm of sleep. Unfortunately, escaping to dreams did not provide the relief I wanted, as his low, wet-sounding voice shaped the reality of them, and they bowed to his annoyingly persistent light. This, too, became something to grow used to. I am now in the middle of my 20s, and I luckily no longer constantly see him ahead of me, but this is because he now typically stands directly behind. He is close enough for his hot breath to be cast against the skin of my neck as he whispers completely degenerate thoughts. His light has dulled with the proximity, and he still makes it his mission to watch me as I sleep, remaining in the shadows next to me, smacking his lips in his low, wet tone. University was harsh with my own negative thoughts, constantly egged on by his derangement. I would slip up on an assignment and get a low grade, only to hear his voice crackle behind me. "You're worthless, a failure." His words would cast images into my mind of harming myself to an extreme that I would prefer not to relive. With my own mental fortitude, I was able to push past these and persevere on my own. "She hates you, worthless." His voice pushed against my already anxious mind the day I met the woman I loved. Throughout our entire relationship, he would begin to speak disdain against her until one day he fell mostly quiet. The man in yellow would watch us sleep like always, but his presence was lost to me against the happiness I was able to truly feel. That love fell short, though, and I was left by myself, alone in a now nearly empty flat with no companionship in almost 20 years. Even though his presence disturbed me, he was truly the only one to stand with me throughout it all. So I decided to take up his ideas and found myself standing at the edge of the apartment complex's roof. Tears were running down my cheeks as I made my decision to say goodbye. With a final prayer spoken to myself, I stepped forward from the building's cold masonry. Instead of feeling the rush of freefall, there was a jolt as a mysterious hand intertwined with the back of my shirt, and I was forcibly yanked backward from my descent. My body crumpled harshly against the concrete roof, and I saw the familiar burst of yellow lights contrast against the night sky. "Stupid, stupid," his voice echoed to me as he retreated into the dark. I looked to him, dumbfounded, and cried out, "What do you want with me?" He refused to respond while continuing to stare in my direction with the piercing whites of his gaze. I found myself crumpling down with sobs of depression and frustration over the actions of my tormentor. We now sit together in silence as I type this, him behind me as we both stare toward this screen. His image is temporarily visible in the reflection of it. Knowing that he can read this as well, I write this in regard to the man in yellow. You have not allowed me the pleasantries to enjoy my life in peace, but whenever I take the actions you implanted upon me, you will not allow me bliss in death. Why? What do you gain from being the parasite against my life? And what have I done to deserve this horrific torment? Tonight, when I fall asleep alone once again, I beg of you to come by my side and into my dreams to whisper your answer. I crave the knowledge of our connection along with what is needed to finally be rid of you. Truly yours, Reader Lemdo, the bearer of the curse to know your existence. I had not wanted to go to the festival. That is what I remember most clearly now, because everyone who came by afterward acted like the decision had meant something. Like it was fate. Like Mayotsi Arlok had chosen the wrong night, or I had chosen the wrong ride, or the two of us had walked into that haunted house, because some quiet part of me already knew what was waiting inside. But it was not like that. Now, I'm going to start this by saying I'm not the smartest man in the world. I never did well in school, always getting into trouble of one sort or another. I barely graduated, and that was only because there was a teacher who saw some glimmer of hope within me and pushed me harder than my own parents. Thanks, Mr. Valor. But just because I'm not the brightest bulb in the drawer doesn't mean I'm crazy, as some people have decided I am. They look at me and whisper in each other's ears as I walk by. Kids laugh and point as I walk past, calling me Cal the Crawler, or just the Crawler. I don't care what they call me, I know what I saw, and it will never leave my memory for as long as I live. As I lay on my deathbed, which I think is closer than I would like it to be, I will remember the scraping of the walls, the heat emanating from them and burrowing its way into my skin, and the scene before me when I reach the end of that godforsaken chamber. That will be the last thing I see before death wraps his gnarled fingers around my neck and chokes out my last breath. So, let me start from the beginning and recount my tale before the cloaked bastard is at the foot of my bed. Like I said, I was never book smart, but I had a knack for things with my hands. I gravitated toward construction once I had left the hallowed halls of Stonegate Regional High. I had a bigger build, burly but thick. I could have played for the football team as a pretty damn good linebacker if I had listened to Coach Sneezin back then. Maybe it would have changed my trajectory in life, gotten me scouted by one of those college coaches with a full scholarship, and gotten me out of this dead-end town. I can't change what I didn't do back then, but the possibilities still haunt me. If I hadn't joined Gardy's construction team, I wouldn't have been there when we found the opening. I wouldn't have followed Semaj inside looking for God knows what. But I did, and I can't take that fact back now, no matter how much I want to. I applied right out of school to learn to be a carpenter so I could get out of the house, be busy, and earn some money to live on my own. Hell knows my old man wanted me out of the house as soon as possible. I reminded him too much of my mother, her soft blue eyes reflected in my face. The pain unearthed every time he looked at me. That should have never been a burden I had to deal with, but life is cruel, and sometimes people are crueler. The scars on my back and years of bruises can attest to that, but that is beside the point. It was Mr. Valor who actually helped me get the job. The old man was neighbors with Gardy and had a pretty good relationship with him. They played cards every Sunday after church while their wives gossiped. I think Valor buttered him up about me, telling him how I had it rough and that I was a sweet kid who needed a break. It didn't take much for me to get hired with Gardy, a preliminary interview. And I was in. He practically took me under his wing, teaching me everything I needed to know himself, signing me up and footing the bill for classes while making me his apprentice. I was soaring. For the first time in my life, I felt like I finally belonged somewhere. I did really well in my carpentry classes. Something about building stuff really clicked in my brain. Soon, I was right alongside Gardy out on the job. I loved it. I finally found my thing. I wasn't the dumbass kid sitting in remedial algebra for the second time. I was at the head of the class. It was great, and life was good for a few years. I managed to scrape up enough money to get a shitty one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. But it was mine, and I felt safe, away from my father. I quickly climbed the ranks with Gardy, and in 2 years, I had a whole team below me. Things were looking up. It wasn't until the park job that I realized I had had it easy before. Things were about to get a lot worse and change me forever. It was winter, December. I can remember the Christmas lights decorating the main street of town while we drove through towards the new job. Gardy had called the night before, telling me that my team and I would be starting on this project today. He explained that we would be in charge of renovations for some of the cabins within the Ash Hollow Park. I guess the park was trying to distance itself from some of the more unsavory things that had happened within its woods over the past 30 years by redoing some of the cabins in preparation for spring and summer. Everyone knew that the forest had a bad reputation. Ask any local. They would fill your head with tales of the serial killer who kidnapped and killed women in a secluded grove, or the several couples that had gone hiking and disappeared. They managed to find one of the victims in a terrible state a few years back, but the others were still gone without a trace. Either way, a job is a job, and I was not worried about any ghosts or ghouls lurking around while we were there. It wasn't the ghosts I should have been looking for. It was the place itself that was cursed. The forest, the soil. Something had long rotted under that place and polluted everything else. We arrived early in the morning to the park, and the rangers directed us towards the old and rotting cabins that had been waiting in disrepair for the last 2 decades. It was a secluded part of the woods, off the beaten path a bit, but I guess that's why we were there. Part of the job was to make new paths from the well-marked trails to the cabins. The job should have taken a few months, weather permitting, but we were in the dead of winter and snow was a constant. An hour or so of setup from the trucks, and we were ready to inspect what lay before us. When I say these cabins were in rough shape, it's not an exaggeration. Most of the foundation and wooden exterior had rotted away, leaving large holes in the roof or the walls of the structure. We would have been better off just starting from scratch and building whole new cabins, but the park wanted to preserve the authentic look by using whatever crap we could salvage from the old place. It was easier to just nod my head and try and do whatever the client wanted than arguing, because they were always going to find something they didn't like and make you redo it. There were 5 small cabins arranged in a semicircle around a large central fire pit. A good amount of work to be done before summer, and only a few months to do it. After the first sweep through the cabins, we started doing what we could with what we had that day, pulling down the rotted boards, salvaging the good wood, and taking note of what needed to be bought and taken to the site the next day. The work kept us going like this for a few weeks. Slowly but surely, we had gotten all of the bad wood out of the cabins and started fixing the foundations. Then, the snow. It was a freak snowstorm that came out of nowhere and dropped 18 inches on us within 2 days. We were out of commission for days. The roads alone were terrible to drive on, and the city wasn't prepared for anything of this scale. So it took days for the streets to be plowed and for anything to start moving again. I knew it was going to be a shit show when we got back to the site. We had been using tarps and coverings to keep the new wood out of the elements, but there was nothing that was going to save it from this. The cabins were going to be buried in layers of snow, and it would take forever before we could get back to them. Sure enough, the sheer amount of snow had done some damage, and that's what led to the eventual downfall of the team and myself. We returned a few days after Snowmageddon and assessed the situation at the site. There were pounds of snow packed into the cabins through the open roofs. The tarps didn't do a thing to hold the amount of snow pushed down on them, and they were eventually buried inside. Luckily, most of the new wood we had acquired was safe, minimal water damage to it, but those tarps held strong. I started to look in each cabin to see what needed to be done. Of course, all the snow would need to be removed, so I started there. Eyeballing each building, looking at the volume, that's when I spotted something weird. It was in the furthest cabin over on the end of the semicircle. The inside of this cabin had the least amount of snow in it, but it was soaked inside. It was as if something had melted the snow from the inside and let the water run free. I stepped inside to get a closer look. There was still a bit left inside, but it almost looked like a bowl had been carved out of the powder down to the wooden floor. I pushed my way through and down to inspect the floor at the center of the anomaly. A wave of heat smacked me as I closed in. It was a dry heat, like one you would find in the Sahara Desert, a suffocating, sweat-inducing heat. I bent down and inspected the ground. The floor was bone dry, like no water had ever hit the spot, and the closer I brought myself to the ground, the greater the heat became. I was covered in sweat now, removing my jacket to make it easier to maneuver. "Hey, Alce," I called out. "Bring me the crowbar from the truck." A minute later, Alce came tramping through the snow with the crowbar, a puzzled look on her face. Alce had always been a hard worker. She wanted my job more than anything and was jealous that someone 15 years younger had surpassed her that quickly. I couldn't blame her. She had been working for Gardy for the last 5 years, doing what I was doing, soaking up all the knowledge and hoping to take the next step up. Not to mention, she was a single mom with 3 kids at home who needed to be fed. I guess her husband had died in a car accident a few years before, and she was struggling to make ends meet. I fucked her plan up, and she hated me for it. "What the fuck are you doing?" she responded. "Where's your jacket? It's like 4 degrees out." I beckoned to her as I bent down to press my ear to the ground. The heat was blistering now. Sweat dripped off my face and onto the wood below. There was a sound coming from under the boards. A low hum was emanating from beneath the floor. I grabbed the crowbar from Alcé and plunged the pointed side between the boards. With a quick push downward, the board cracked up. A blast of heat poured from under the board and hit my face. A drip, drip, drip could be heard from down below, the sound of the melted snow hitting stone. "Hand me your light," I said, reaching towards Alcé. She unhooked the flashlight from her side and tossed it to me. From behind her, I heard crunching feet as Lade and Samaj joined the audience. Lade was someone you needed on a site like this. He was easygoing, had been through the works before, and this is where he landed. He was someone who had a billion stories to tell about his life. Apparently, he had left home when he was young, joined the army, and did a few tours before bouncing around the world looking for the next big thing. That's when he met his wife here. They fell madly in love, and he settled down. He said he'd been in this town for the better part of the last 25 years and regretted nothing. Samaj, on the other hand, was the issue. The loose cannon on site. He always needed to be monitored because he got easily distracted. He had that kind of energy a golden retriever has when they haven't been outside in a few hours. Bouncy and prone to knocking things over. It was bad enough that he loved to pull these stupid little pranks that he thought were hilarious. At the end of the day, though, he did his job, and we needed the hands and couldn't afford to let him go. It was better than nothing. "What's happening, boss?" he said through a half-closed mouth, a cigarette hanging out of the other side. "Something wrong?" "I don't know," I replied. "Something's down here. Come take a look." They gathered around the hole in the floor, staring, puzzled at what I had unearthed. I looked up at them with the same look. I shined the beam down into the hole. It wasn't a hole in the ground, it was more like a cave. The slick stone walls looked to be coated in a layer of water, likely from the snow above. The passage was big enough for someone small to fit into, but it curved a few feet down and out of sight. I pushed myself up from kneeling, careful not to put any pressure on the broken boards. "All of you stay right here," I said as I got up from the ground. "I'm going to call Gardy." I crunched over the failed snow back to the truck, the bitter cold nipping at my face again. There was a clear difference from standing over the hole in the cabin. Outside, it felt like a hot summer day. Inside, blistering heat poured from the ground, while a few feet away it was freezing again. Something wasn't right. What could even cause something like that? I've heard of underground lava tubes on the Discovery Channel before, but never anywhere around here. That could be the only thing that could be making that much heat. I opened the truck door and rummaged around in my bag, looking for my phone. With a quick glance back, I could see Samaj pressing his head down close to the opening, imitating sunbathing. I shook my head. Samaj's antics were not what I needed today, especially if whatever this thing was could be dangerous. My crew always comes first. "Hey Gardy," I said, putting him on speakerphone as I continued to watch Samaj closely. "We found something really odd in one of the cabins." "Damage?" he asked. "We knew there was going to be some dam." "No," I cut him off. "Well, yes, but it's something else. An opening or something under the furthest cabin, like a cave." "What?" he replied. "There shouldn't be anything like that anywhere near there. Those cabins have been there for years with no issues. I have no documentation of a cave or hole under any of the cabins." "I know. What if it's a sinkhole?" All of a sudden, a scream cut through the silence of the forest. I turned around at such speed it should have sent my head spinning. Fuck. I always do this. I pace when I talk on the phone, and I stopped watching Samaj. Looking back at where my crew was, I only spotted Alcé and Lade staring downward into the hole. "What was that?" Gardy yelled into the phone. "Samaj," I gasped. He fell into it. "Send someone out now. I'm going to try and see if I can get him out." I hung up the phone and ran over, my feet getting stuck as I tried to trample over the mounds of snow in my way. "What happened?" I called out to Lade and Alce. They turned to me with frightened looks. "No clue, boss," Lade responded. "I went for another smoke and left the two of them here." He pointed at Alce. "I went to check my phone," Alce said. "My kid is sick and home today, and I needed to check on her." Fuck. I looked down into the hole below. Somehow, it looked like it had gotten bigger, which was impossible. There was no way for it to get any bigger without blowing it up. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, or the mix of hot and cold was playing with my vision. It didn't matter. I needed to get Semaj out of there before something worse happened. I flicked on the light Alce gave me earlier and flashed it into the cave again. It definitely looked bigger. I think I could fit into it now, and I was a bigger guy than Semaj was. Weird, but Semaj needed to get out of there. I couldn't see him at the bottom. He must have slipped past the curve. "Semaj," I yelled, my voice echoing back to me. "Are you hurt?" A weak voice replied, "Yeah, my leg." I slipped on the broken boards and fell feet first down the hole. The water on the sides made me slip further in, and I smashed my leg. I turned around and looked at Alce and Lade. "I'm going to go in and get him," I said, sighing. "Wait up here and pull us out when I grab him." I turned back to the cave and called down, "Semaj, I'm coming down to get you." I sat down on the wooden floor, scooting towards the edge of the hole like I was getting into a pool. With one swift motion, I flipped myself around and swung my feet down so they touched the slick sides of the cave wall. Hanging with only my hands, I slowly lowered myself into the opening until I couldn't go any further and let myself drop. Luckily, the damp sides of the cave and the way it curved softened my fall of only a few feet, sliding me down into the deeper part of the cavern where Semaj's voice was coming from. "Semaj, where are you, buddy?" The light illuminated more and more of the cavern as I continued forward. A sloping path led deeper and deeper downward into an unknowable place. That's when I spotted him, lying on the ground, staring up at me with a pained look. "There you are," I said with a sigh of relief. He wasn't too far down into the cave, so it shouldn't be that hard to get him out. "Give me your arms." I reached down to grab him. The ceiling of the cavern was tall enough where we could both stand, so if I could get Semaj on his good foot, we could hobble out of here slowly. "Thank God," Semaj said. "I thought I was going to be stuck down here." "As much as I would have loved that," I replied, chuckling. "Let me take a look at your leg." The cave was hot. I could feel the heat emanating from the stone around us, almost like we were in an oven. There was something else, too. The deeper I went, the more the walls around us changed in texture. It went from a sleek, damp-covered rock to almost a mossy feeling underneath my feet. The water from the snow above mixed with something on the walls, creating a kind of mucus mixture that was dripping from the ceiling and onto my back. It was sticky and didn't come off easily. "Yeah, about the whole leg thing," Semaj said with a sly look on his face. "I kind of faked it." As soon as the words came out of his mouth, I was on top of Semaj, pinning him to the floor. A hot rage boiled inside my chest, ready to explode at any minute. I grabbed Semaj by the collar of his shirt and thrust him down hard into the stone beneath us. "WHY? The fuck would you do this?" I roared, the anger rising with each passing second. "WY? The fuck would you come down here?" Semaj's face changed. The light from the flashlight illuminated a thin streak across it. The joy and mischievous energy that was there a moment before fled, and what returned was a look of pure terror. "I wanted to see what was down here, man," he squeaked out. "You would have never let me come down here, so I had to think of something." I picked him up by the collar again and slammed him back down into the rocks. The breath left him as he hit. The rage flooded every part of my body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pummel Semaj so hard I would have to carry him out of here in pieces. "I knew you were a fucking moron, but I didn't think you were this idiotic," I spat at him. "You know what, Semaj? You're done. When we get out of here, you are packing your shit up and going home. You're fired." I really need this job, man," Semaj choked out. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, man." "Fuck you. I'm really sorry, man. Fuck you. You put you and me in danger. and now we have to get out of this fucking pit. I slammed my hand into the floor next to Semaj's face. Blood trickled from my knuckles and mixed with the mucus mixture. Semaj's eyes welled with tears, and his face reflected pure terror. A pang went off within my heart. A memory flashed through my head. It was of my father, doing the same shit, slamming me down and beating me for the smallest thing. Semaj was just trying to bring some levity to the work site, although the way he did it was moronic. My face softened. I can't be like him. I have to be different and control the rage. I pulled myself off Semaj and pulled him up. I'm sorry. I went too far. Let's just get out of here. We will talk about your job once we are out. Semaj sniffled and wiped his face, trying to hide the tears in his eyes. I bent down and grabbed the flashlight from the floor. My hand throbbed from punching the stone. That was stupid. A bit of my dad passed down through me, and I just couldn't contain it. I used the light to examine my hand quickly. There were a few small scrapes from where my knuckles hit the ground. The wounds were leaking blood, but they were superficial. They would heal quickly if left alone. There was a moment of silence between Semaj and me, an unspoken tension that filled the cavern. It wasn't completely silent, though. The cavern was alive with sounds from all over. Our breathing reverberated off the walls and back to our ears. The dripping of the melting snow from above gave the illusion of a metronome keeping pace with some hidden rhythm. But there was something else. It was that low, guttural hum coming from deeper in the cavern. A buzzing in my brain made my thoughts fuzzy in a way I had never felt before. I almost wanted to go deeper, to climb as far as I could until I could find the source of this incessant noise and put an end to it. I turned the light back down the cavern, seeing what I could make out from further in, but it continued to slope down and the ceiling obscured the descent. Let's go, I waved to Semaj, and we began the trek back to the entrance. We could hear Lade and Alcee yelling something from outside the hole, but it was muffled, like there was a dampener on their voices. We continued to trek through the muck stuck to the walls. It coated my feet, making it hard not to slip. I had to use my hands to grip onto the walls, digging through a layer of slime to reach the warm stone underneath to steady myself. The stone itself was warm, but there was something else to it, too. A kind of beating or thrumming seemed to coincide with the buzzing noise from before. It came and went in intervals, almost like the cave had its own heartbeat. That idea freaked me out, so I pushed the thought out of my head and trekked on. Soon, I could see light outlining the slope upward and out into the winter air again. I could see Lade leaning down and looking for any sign of life. "We are here," I called out, "and we are both fine." Semaj thought it would be funny to pull a prank and dive into the cave. I looked back with a stern face, and Semaj looked away like a puppy that had gotten into the garbage. "Help me up, would you?" I called up to the two of them as I reached my hands up. "I need a shower after all this shit." Lade reached his hand down and grasped mine. It wasn't long before our grip began to slip, the slime making it much harder to grab onto anything. I dug my foot hard into the stone of the wall and pushed up, trying to get better leverage on Lade. "Alcee," Lade said, "come grab Cal's other hand. He's covered in cave gunk, and it's hard to grab him." In a moment, Alcee was now above us with Lade. Her outstretched hand joined Lade's, and I grabbed them both. They pulled, and I started to make some progress when I heard it. A deep moan from below me. It sounded like when someone had been kicked in the junk when I was younger. A deep, guttural, painful moan that rattled my bones and sent a shiver down my spine. Lade and Alcee exchanged a look of terror, and then began to pull me up faster. Then, I felt pressure around my leg. I was being pulled down. I looked down and saw Semaj grabbing at my legs, holding on for dear life. "Faster," he yelled up to me. "I think there is something down here." Then, the floor dropped out from beneath him. I don't know how it happened. One moment he was standing on stone, the next it moved and straightened out. The sound of rock cracking came from below, and then there was no more floor. The slope I was leaning on vanished, and the foothold I had disappeared. I scrambled with my one free leg to gain purchase on something, but the gunk on the walls was too slick. I couldn't get a hold of anything, and now Semaj was screaming from below me, dangling over a darkened pit. His weight was too much. With one final glance up, I saw as Lade and Alcee lost their footing and tumbled downward towards me. In an instant, my stomach flipped, and we were falling. Lyra, where's my breakfast? It's the same every day. Where's my breakfast? Why isn't this place cleaner? What makes you think I'm interested in your opinion? S. What makes you think you get an opinion? Cass. Cal wasn't always like this. He used to be a decent man, at least I thought he was. Then he lost his job and couldn't find another one, and the bitterness changed him. And then the world went to hell, and our marriage went with it. I put the plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. He immediately began eating. There was no thank you. There never is. I'm going out, he said. Make sure this place is cleaned up when I get back. I'd suggest going with him, but I knew he wouldn't let me. No matter what I said, he was convinced I'd only slow him down. Ever since society fell when the virus hit, the world no longer belonged to us. It belonged to the roamers. Anyone who didn't acknowledge that didn't live long. I locked our bunker behind him, making sure the bolts and barricades were secure, and then moved around quietly, cleaning dishes, straightening up, washing the blood from his clothes in the sink. He'd had a close encounter the other day. I'd been a nurse before, so blood wasn't new to me, but there was a lot. After I was done, I sat around in the dark and waited for him to get home. There was a pounding at the door. I unlatched everything and let him in, redoing the locks once he was inside. How did it go? I asked. Had a close call? I barely made it out. Roamers. He shook his head. Hunters. The roamers, not zombies. This wasn't a science fiction movie. Were dangerous. They were slow, but they didn't feel pain, didn't get tired, didn't stop. But they weren't the only threat. Equally dangerous were the hunters, wandering bands of once civilized men who constantly moved around, stealing what they wanted and shooting anything that moved, human or roamer. If you came across them, you ran. How many? At least 20. I whistled in amazement. That's got to be one of the biggest bands we've seen, right? He looked at me dismissively. We? Were you there next to me? That's not fair. You know I'm willing to be out there, but you won't take me. And what exactly would you do against roamers? Offer to do their laundry. He walked past me dismissively. I expect dinner to be ready when I'm out, he said, and closed the bathroom door. I sat on the couch, wondering if safety and comfort were really worth the price I was paying. I couldn't leave. I didn't have anywhere to go or any friends who were still alive. Better to stick it out. A few days later, he came home angry. What happened? He threw his backpack against the floor. I had it. I found a hidden stash filled with tons of supplies. It would have set me up for weeks, but a group of hunters came and I had to run. They took everything, those bastards. That stash was mine. Well, you can find another one. You always do, I said, trying to be supportive. Suddenly I saw a flash and fell to the ground. I reached for my cheek, feeling a sharp pain. He hit me. In all our time together, he'd never hit me. I stared at him in disbelief. For a moment, he looked like he regretted it, but it passed quickly. Just get dinner ready. I'll eat after I clean up. I sat on the floor and thought about what my life had become. During dinner, I spoke. You need backup. Wouldn't having someone to watch your back be better than being out there alone? At least I could keep lookout and signal if more hunters tried to sneak up on you. He paused, weighing my words. If I let you come, you do what I say, when I say. And if you screw up, you're on your own. I won't be a problem. You'll see. I wasn't sure if this would go the way I envisioned it. But if not, well, maybe it was better to die all at once than a little bit every day. A week later, he came to me, fully prepped. There's a spare pack by the door. Keep up. I grabbed the spare pack, put my bag inside, and followed him out the door. It was the first time I'd been outside in months. Everything looked completely the same and completely different. Buildings that once gleamed now looked run down and decrepit. Industrial zones had been overtaken by nature. It was a new world, and it no longer belonged to us. We were walking when we heard a noise. Kian. I saw something. Relax. It was probably just a fox. Do foxes usually look like 5 men walking upright? He paused. Where? I pointed to his left. Over there. A group moving that way. He turned and looked. You sure? Yes, I responded, sliding the syringe into his neck. I'm sure. An hour later, I watched through binoculars from my hidden spot 200 yards away. I watched Kyan wake up and realize something was wrong. I watched him grab at his throat, realizing he couldn't speak, only moan. I watched him try to stand, stumbling, as he realized he could barely walk, due to the partial paralytic I'd administered. I watched the band of hunters approach his position from around the corner. Silently, I thanked my father for the survival skills he'd taught me, that Kian had never known about because he'd never listened. It would be tough surviving in this world alone. But as I watched Kian try to flee as the hunters approached the groaning, shuffling figure and took aim, I thought, sometimes alone is better. My wife stared at our daughter's latest doodle sitting on the kitchen island and covered her mouth. Whenever our little Seely proudly handed us one of her colorful drawings, we would happily display it on our refrigerator. This one, we wouldn't. Although Seely's favorite medium was crayon, she had talent. From smiling suns to happy stick people with balloons, from dogs and rainbows to ladybugs and birds, they all made us glow with love and warmth, grateful we'd brought such a happy little flower into the world. This was the first doodle since Seely's accident. It had been a while, so we asked her if she would like to try and draw something again. She agreed, but only wanted the black crayon. My wife and I both studied the latest effort: no houses or people, no blue skies and rainbows. The entire page was filled with elongated faces with gaping jaws and scribbled out X eyes. My wife kicked her chair back and stormed out in floods of tears. I watched her go, and with trembling hands, removed the crayon from the hole I'd specially drilled into our Ouija board's planchette. In the 14 years we'd worked at that goddamn sweatshop, Valera never missed a shift, so when she didn't show up one winter morning, a sour dread swept through my gut. I called her. The line didn't even ring. Something was wrong. I left without permission and began sprinting across the city, slipping across patches of ice concealed beneath the snowfall, frigid air biting at my lungs. She'd spoken oddly on the phone the night before, slurring her words, gushing about those beautiful truths we could discover about Mom within the marshlands of Peru. All I had to do was finally agree to take the trip with her. She claimed it would be a pilgrimage, a means of healing through communion with our mother's birth country. If we could connect with her, if we could comprehend the tiniest sliver of why she abandoned us, maybe we could forgive her, maybe we could move on. It was ridiculous. Borderline delusional. There was nothing for us in Peru. Besides, what could the marshlands teach us about Mom that we hadn't already learned the day she discarded us, her only children, on the streets of Detroit? I kept my mouth shut, though. Valera worked hard to salvage our lives. Putting my calloused soul on display felt like spitting in her face. Instead, I rolled my eyes, assumed her drunk, and choked out my annual refrain. We'll go next year, I promise. I never had any intention of saying yes. I had plenty of chances to change my mind, but year after year, I coldly withstood her heartfelt pleas. I'd be lying if I said I didn't experience a similar longing, a yearning for answers that would sometimes keep me up at night, but I suppressed it, forced it down deep. Visiting her country was a symbol, an act of forgiveness. My mother did not deserve forgiveness. Fuck her, and fuck the putrid soil that supported her miserable feet. I would not go to that place, not even for Valera. And yet, despite the belief that my stubbornness was completely justified, all I could think about as I raced through the snowfall was the cruel deceit of those 6 little words. We'll go next year, I promise. I arrived at Valera's a little after dawn. Dense overcast stained her towering apartment complex an ashen gray. I slammed into the fire exit with the broken lock and began bolting up the stairs. Cockroaches skittered from my aching heels. Before long, I was in front of apartment 602, fumbling with my spare key, praying I was wrong, praying my bleak intuition was wildly off the mark. The door jerked open. Hazy light from the hallway trickled into her jet-black apartment. I felt my body go numb. She was on the floor. Face down, sprawled out, transfixed and rigid. Her corpse harbored this strange brightness. Her skin seemed to glow in the darkness, shimmering a dull crimson like molten metal that had begun to cool. Carbon monoxide can do that, apparently. The coroner detailed the pathology to me with a tone-deaf excitement, shaking his wrinkled hands, talking himself breathless. Carbon monoxide is greedy, he said. The odorless gas hijacks your blood. That piracy alters the blood cells, displacing precious oxygen and brightening them in the process. That's why the corpses flush. Suffocation makes them shine like a dying star. The whole thing tore me apart. I couldn't swallow the raw brutality of it. Valera died alone, completely without ceremony. A quick and meaningless end to a hard-fought life. When we were abandoned, Detroit was bursting at the seams with strays. The city wouldn't have saved us. If social services didn't have enough resources to rescue their own children, what chance did a pair of non-natives have? My sister refused to just lie down and die, though. She found a job. The man running the sweatshop wouldn't allow a 5-year-old to hang around the factory floor, so while Valera toiled away in front of a sewing machine, I hid in the alleyway behind the factory. Tucked myself snugly behind this massive battleship of a dumpster at the crack of dawn, and I wouldn't come out until I heard Valera knocking a code into the rusted metal, usually well after the sun had set. The hiding spot required painful contortion. Some nights, my leg spasms were so violent that she'd have to carry me to whatever underpass we were currently calling home. Before winter, though, Valera had earned enough money. We moved what little we had to a tiny apartment in the projects. Once I was old enough, she got me a job at the factory, too. The sweatshop was a marginal improvement over the dumpster. The smell inside was slightly less foul, and my calves had a little more wiggle room, though I couldn't seem to escape the gaze of this lanky boy with pale blue eyes and a cleft upper lip. It took him a few months to work up the nerve to talk to me. We quickly became inseparable. A decade later, Aaron and I welcomed our daughter into the world. Layla was about to turn 6 when Valera died. "I don't want a party this year." She was sulking at the table, stirring a bowl of leathery slush that had once been Cheerios. I'd barely registered what she had said. I was standing at the sink, staring at the wall, pretending to wash dishes. The near-scalding water felt good on my hands. "Why's that, sweetheart?" Aaron chirped. "Well, Auntie Vale isn't getting one, so..." Layla stood, trudged across the kitchen, and dumped the disintegrated cereal into the basin. "It's not fair," she continued. "None of it seems fair. Life isn't fucking fair." The caustic response spilled from my lips like a quiet exhale, automatic, thoughtless. When I realized what I'd said, I shifted towards Leela. She was studying me with wide, unblinking eyes. Her grimace betrayed a painful confusion. This was her first brush with death. Painful confusion had been her default setting for weeks. Her eyes became glassy. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but all that came out was hot air. Aaron scooped her into his arms and forced a smile. "Mommy's not mad, okay? She's just really tired. Want to go watch some TV?" She pressed her face into his chest and nodded. As he paced out of the kitchen, Aaron shot me a look. That outlook. Mommy may not have been mad, but Daddy sure was. There was a distant click. The muffled pandemonium of Saturday morning cartoons started echoing through our small home. I sighed and turned off the faucet. Much as I'd been enjoying the hurt, the scalding water had reddened my hands. The sight of flushed skin made me want to vomit. Aaron marched back into the kitchen, broad feet slapping against the hardwood. I stuck my hands into my pockets, closed my eyes, and braced myself. "The hell was that?" he hissed. I shrugged. "What, you disagree? You think what happened to Vale is fair?" My God, that is not the point. My blood ignited. I spun around to face him. "Oh, I'm sorry. I had no idea there was a fucking point. Please, Aaron, enlighten me." He glanced towards the living room. "Keep your voice down." I stomped up to him and spat out a single word. "Why? Why?" I glared at him. There was another distant click, followed by a high-pitched, muted sob. I heard Leela too, but I would not yield. I would not yield. I wanted him to fight back. His jaw tightened, but abruptly went slack. He looked away from me, a reaction more damaging than any insult. Jesus. Where are you right now, Marcia? I cocked my head, but he didn't elaborate. He walked off to attend to Layla, leaving me in the kitchen to puzzle over what the hell he meant. In retrospect, I think I understand. He was asking me to get a fucking grip, begging me to divest my selfish wrath and realize what's important. The question's effect on me, however, was much more literal than Aaron intended. Where was I? Detroit. But was that where I should be? I couldn't get that question out of my head. It kept repeating, incessant and deafening. Then it hit me. I figured out where I should be. I took a clandestine trip to a nearby pawn shop. My engagement ring wasn't worth much. The stone was only a half carat after all, but it was enough. 800 would cover the plane tickets and a few nights in a hostel. I know how it sounds, but I had a plan. Valera wasn't the only one who died from the gas leak, so there were talks of a class action lawsuit against the landlord. As if anything in this world can be considered a guarantee, I convinced myself that those earnings would surely buy the ring back someday. I started to leave around midnight. Our home was silent, save for my husband's wispy snores and the soft hum of the TV. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and tiptoed into the living room. They had fallen asleep together on the sofa. I stared at Aaron for a while, watching the TV bejewel his closed eyelids with its opaline flicker. He was going to be furious, but I would never come to terms with her death until I did this. It was my way of making amends. I stuck the post-it note onto his cell phone before slipping out into the cold, moonless night. S flying to Peru, back in 2 days. Will text to let you know I'm safe. SC number S. I landed in Lima at noon. Exiting onto the tarmac, I was struck by an intense disorientation. The flight crew warned us that we might experience altitude sickness, but I had no idea how immediate and debilitating it would be. The sun was blinding. My head pounded. Every breath was a struggle. Compared to Detroit's thin ozone, the thick tropical air felt like inhaling jelly. Hesitation festered in those breathless moments, but I squashed it. I couldn't turn back. I needed to see this through. I collapsed onto a bench outside the airport, took as deep a breath as I could manage, and switched my phone off airplane mode. A flurry of texts and missed calls flooded the screen, notification after notification. The device was practically convulsing. I sent landed, "I'm okay," to Aaron without letting my eyes linger on the 20 unread texts above it. Then I called for a cab. Once they arrived, I returned the device to airplane mode. Lima is at the center of the coast, but my destination was closer to the wilder reaches. That's where the marshlands bloom. Whenever she'd try to sell me on this pilgrimage, Valera always harped on the fucking marshlands. I never asked why, though I suspect she was channeling some fragment of Mom, some piece of her that I had forgotten. Valera was 12 when we were abandoned. I was 5. She actually had some memories of the woman. Maybe Mom harped on them too. Maybe the marshlands made her nostalgic for home. All things considered, a nature reserve seemed as good a spot as any for a healing communion with the land. It wasn't hard to narrow down which I'd visit. A few miles north of Toombies, there was a small park that just seemed right. I didn't know much about it, but for whatever reason, I couldn't see myself going anywhere else. Luckily, it was beautiful. I was reluctant to acknowledge the beauty at first, but as I stood on the shoreline, basking in the grandeur of what was effectively a tropical swamp, I felt my reluctance melt away. Tangled reeds rose in clusters from the salt water, ornate yet chaotic, spiraling closer and closer together until they unified as a single wall. Their canopy was fiercely animated. Small monkeys with slender arms and pot bellies swung through the brush in chains. Exotic birds zipped between the branches, vibrant blurs of color swirling together to manifest a shifting kaleidoscope made with golds and violets and deep, deep reds. I dipped my toes in the water and stared at the forest, and I felt full, buoyant, happy even. Then, with a single thought, I crumbled. Valera should have been here too. I'd been such an asshole. I stewed on the shore for a long while, marinating in an acidic mixture of self-loathing and melancholy, until something odd caught my attention. A man lurking in my peripheral vision. His head was peeking out of the river, wet eyes leering at me through thick strands of soggy gray hair. My eyes snapped forward. There was a stone bobbing on the surface of the river, but no spying man. I whispered the word Sidiot as I turned to leave the reserve. It was an hour-and-a-half walk to the nearest hostel. I had enough money to afford another cab, but I didn't call one. I didn't deserve the luxury. I lurched along the roadside, head low, bare shoulders baking in the afternoon sun, becoming more despondent with each miserable step. The lush, rolling countryside was exceptionally quiet, a far cry from the ceaseless bluster of Detroit. Under different circumstances, I would have welcomed the tranquility. In the moment, though, the empty air only made the voice in my head seem louder. Why was I here? What did I expect to gain? Insight? Absolution? Levity? Stupid. It was all so stupid, so short-sighted, so goddamn pointless. All of a sudden, my ears perked. There was a soft, steady crunching a few yards back, the sound of dry grass being crushed under a boot heel. Was someone following me? I paused. The crunching stopped. I balled my hand into a fist, took a deep breath, and whipped my head around. But there was no one, just the winding road and the sleepy hills. My heart rate slowed. When I started walking, the crunching resumed. I peered over my shoulder, still nothing behind me. I did my best to ignore the unsettling phenomenon, but by the time I arrived at the hostel, the sun was setting, my calves were screaming, and my mind was ragged. In other words, I was ready for a drink. Ass. My memories of that night are disturbingly incomplete. Here's what I do remember. It begins with me at the back of this dimly lit dive bar. I'm brooding, throwing back liquor at a reckless pace, when I'm suddenly approached by a well-dressed man. He's sporting an indigo blazer and black chinos, overdressed for the stifling heat. Up close, he smells like brine. The table wobbles when he leans on it, one leg shorter than the others. He steadies my glass with 2 fingers so it doesn't fall. A small wave of brandy laps at his gaunt fingertips. He takes his hand out of my glass and sits down. I can't remember whether he introduced himself or just sat down and started talking. Called himself Nalkaya, something like that. Over and over he apologizes. I ask him, what for? He claims I already know, but I make him spell it out. For Valera, he says. For the way she is fixated on perfectly good air. For the way the gas toyed with her mind. For the terror of her last moments, hallucinating alone in a lightless apartment. For everything, really. Wait, did I tell you all this? I ask. He says I probably did. Then he keeps talking. I'm not sure what about. I'm distracted by the whites of his eyes. There's movement. Pinpoints appear, enlarge, and then dissolve. Sort of like film grain. The rhythm is hypnotic. I'm comfortably spellbound until he says something that catches my attention. Would you like to commune with your sister? Slowly, with apprehension, I nod. From there, my recollection really fragments. There are breaks, skips in time, pieces I've lost. I follow him out of the bar, stumbling. I slip on the edge of the door frame, plunge forward, and close my eyes, preparing myself for the impact. But there's nothing, no collision, no shattering bones, just a clean emptiness, a starving void. When I open my eyes, we're in a van. Melkaya's driving. I don't see anyone else, but there's laughter, so much laughter. Thousands of shrill, squeaking cackles coming from the driver's seat, an excruciating cacophony, enraged wasps probing my eardrums. Welcome home, little leech. Don't be afraid. Your baptism is overdue, but it'll be over before you know it too, he says. We're accelerating. I can tell by how the darkened countryside is passing by, faster and faster. I plead for him to stop the car, but I can't even hear the words leaving my mouth. And Melkaya is not even watching the road anymore. He's twisted over the seat, leering at me, pinpoints dancing across the whites of his eyes, and then, quiet in an instant, the laughter's gone. Salty air scrapes my tongue. A bird trills far overhead. I look around. I'm sitting at the front of a small rowboat, floating down a narrow river hemmed in by gnarled webs of mangrove roots. Moonlight drapes a faint silver membrane over the otherwise shadow-swelled landscape. Behind me, I hear someone rowing. I know it's Melchiah, but I don't dare turn around and check. Do you see her? He whispers. I squint, carefully searching the root beds. My heart is stammering. My thoughts are frantic. How the fuck did I get here? What the hell is going on? Do you see your sister Marcia? He moans. The blackness is nearly impenetrable, but I look closer, because I desperately want her to be there, because I need to tell Valera that I love her, and that I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong the night she died, but I didn't act. I could hear it in her voice when we spoke on the phone, but I chose to ignore it, because the way she talked about Mom made me so goddamned angry. I could have saved her, like she saved me. But I didn't. My eyes widen. I think I see something downstream. I convince myself something's there. A nebulous shape looming within the palisade of mangroves. My body's drifting forward, over the lip of the boat. I murmur my sister's name. Valera? I wait. A hand streaked with crimson skin erupts from the brackish river. Bloated fingers wrap around my wrist and pull. I don't have time to scream. I lose my balance and topple over the side of the boat, dragged under by the flushed red hand. Water surges into my chest when I attempt to breathe. Mud seeps into my stomach, causing it to spasm. I thrash, but it does nothing to slow my descent. My fingers hunt for something to anchor onto. I can't determine if my eyes are open or closed. The darkness is all-consuming. I feel myself slipping away. Suddenly, something cold and sturdy grazes my palm. I use my remaining energy to squeeze it. The surface is smooth like metal. It's round and it fits nicely in my palm. Reflexively, I turn my wrist. There's a creak. My foot drifts forward and somehow finds solid ground. I'm stepping into my home. The door slams shut behind me. Aaron is racing down the hallway. I double over, coughing, hacking like there's something stuck in my lungs. And my vision is dappled with tiny, pulsing dots. But, you don't remember anything about how you got home. The park bench squeaked as Aaron slid closer. He was sweating. His eyes darted between me and Leela, who was pedaling her bicycle along a nearby footpath. I massaged his stone shoulders. No, I really don't. I was at the bar top, drinking. Some guy came up and bothered me, said some strange shit, but he was harmless. Then, 24 hours later, I'm home. I pause, preparing another lie. But in between? Nothing at all. Lee, what'd I say? Stay where I can see you. Startled. Leela wobbled, then tumbled off her bike, landing knees. First onto the pavement. Come here, love, I called out. Leela pulled herself together, stood, and then began plodding over to us, dragging her bike by the handlebars. Fresh blood glistened across her kneecaps. I stopped the massage and started rifling through my purse. Never went anywhere without a few Band-Aids and Neosporin since we took off her training wheels. She slumped on the grass next to me, bleary-eyed. Can I try to fix it? Her lips cracked into a delicate smile. I bent over and began smearing the antiseptic on her abraded skin. And the guy you mentioned, the one in the suit, you don't think he, took advantage of the situation? What? I ask, lifting my head and throwing it over my shoulder. Aaron's pale blue eyes were wide and damp. Took me a second to realize what he was dancing around. For whatever reason, that was the farthest thing from my mind. Oh. No, I don't think that freak did anything pornographic. Relief flooded over him. His shoulders seemed the slightest bit looser as he blotted a few tears with his shirt collar. Thank God. That said, maybe he spiked my drink? Not with roofies, with, I don't know, a hallucinogen, something that could explain the amnesia. Can't say why anyone would dose a complete stranger, but my voice trailed off. Out of nowhere, every cell in my body began to buzz, and my attention was drawn to a man limping past us. His name was Mateo. He was well known in the neighborhood as a sweet but self-destructive man. Uncontrolled diabetes had ravaged his body. He couldn't see well, couldn't feel much below the waist, and, worst of all, there was his foot, or what was left of it. From the shin down, the appendage was gangrenous, black like a cannonball and as cold as sleet, with a stench that could likely be appreciated from the upper atmosphere. When the tissue first went tits up, Mateo refused to get it amputated. We all assumed his days were numbered, and yet, years later, here he was, seesawing his way around, panhandling like usual. The necrotic tissue just never got infected, even though it absolutely should have. A perverse and sadistic miracle. Today, though, something was different. The flesh was moving, churning. The blackened skin peeking out from his dirt-caked sneaker snapped and bubbled like boiling tar, surreal and revolting. I looked to his face. He wasn't in pain, he wasn't in distress, he wore the hollow smile and the vacant eyes of a lifelong scavenger, same as he always did. Nausea clawed at the back of my throat. I told myself it wasn't real. I tried to tear my eyes away, but God, I couldn't. There was something bewitching about the way his flesh churned. A pattern, meaning concealed within its beats and cadences. Something that needed to be felt to be completely understood. A tactile language like Braille. The tips of my fingers began throbbing. Bizarre notions took root in my mind. The way flesh moved. Something about it reminded me of Valera's voice. No, I thought. That's absurd. But was it absurd? Speech is just a series of vibrations, right? Vibrations that could just as easily swim through dead meat as they could living vocal cords? No. I needed to get a fucking grip. There was another explanation. I was exhausted. I was still under the effect of some hallucinogen. I was sick. No matter what I threw at it, though, the notion persisted. Some part of her was in that dead flesh. It was a paradox. The notion made no sense, and yet I'd never felt so sure of something, and all I had to do to know for certain was, feels it move. I needed to touch Mateo's whispering foot, needed to burrow my fingertips into the rot until I heard what she was saying. Ah, Mommy. Leela's screech brought me back to reality. My lungs ached. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. Sorry, love. Here it is. I ripped the paper tabs from the Band-Aid and stuck it on her knee, only half paying attention, keeping Mateo fixed in my peripheral vision until he was well and truly out of sight. It was agonizing to let him go. Like allowing free heroin to slip from your grasp when you're in seething withdrawal. I turned to Aaron. He was looking in Mateo's direction too, but his expression was flat, unbothered. He couldn't see what I could. As we left the park, Aaron made me promise to see a physician this week to address the amnesia, and a therapist within the month to address everything else. His conditions for forgiving my impulsive excursion abroad. I promised I would. That said, my mind was elsewhere. Melchiah, whoever he was, claimed he was granting me the ability to commune with Valera. Was this it? Did communion require some sort of medium, flesh as the interface between the living and the dead? Had I missed my opportunity? I could only answer the last of those three questions. I hadn't missed my opportunity, because I knew which alleyway Mateo slept in at night. None. The next morning, I returned to the factory for the first time since Valera's death. It was a strange and lonely homecoming. Not only was Valera gone, but Aaron was absent as well. The flu had been doing the rounds at Leela's school. It was only a matter of time until she contracted it. He implored me to call out and take care of her, but I told him that was a bad idea. Although our workplace was much less exploitive than it had been when we initially signed on, it was still run by a merciless organization whose patience could only be tested so much. Since he had continued to work while I was out on the few days of bereavement my manager would afford me, it was important that I show my face. It was nicer than I anticipated. There was a blissful normality to the labor. The droning hum of the many sewing machines, the repetitive movements, the familiarity, and the routine. The comfort, however, was fleeting. Before long, my fingertips began to throb. I thought of Mateo's whispering foot. Then my manager approached. Grace was a large woman with patchy gray hair and close-set eyes that seemed equally devoid of color. She stood over my station, tapping her foot as if she were waiting for me to do something, though I couldn't say what. Without warning, she started berating me. In essence, she was accusing Aaron and me of some sort of conspiracy, an attempt to defraud them. Why had there been only one of us present at any given time? What exactly were we trying to pull? Something to that effect. I don't remember precisely what she said. I couldn't focus on her paranoid rant. I was too distracted by her tongue. The flesh was whispering to me. Valera's voice, it was in there. I could tell by the way the wet muscle vibrated. I'd do anything to speak to my sister again, right? Yes, I would. I leaped from my chair, hand outstretched, reaching for her mouth. The suddenness of my outburst caught Grace off guard. She yelled, "Get back, you!" before my fingers interrupted her. I cradled her tongue in my palm and pressed my fingertips into the warm, wriggling flesh. A panic scream reverberated through the small bones in my wrist. I could feel Valera. I could almost hear her, too. She was trying to tell me something, but her voice was muffled, coarse with static, like a call with a shoddy connection. As Grace's teeth began to clamp down, I dragged my fingertips across her tongue, arranging them into various configurations, trying to locate the pattern that would amplify this divine signal. Pain exploded across the back of my hand. I launched my arm back and ripped it from her mouth. Strips of skin peeled away under the pressure of her front teeth. The force caused Grace to fall backward onto the floor. I stared at the traumatized woman. Blood trickled from her trembling lips. Her eyes were bulging, ripe with shock and fear. People were gathering around us. No one was exactly sure what happened. I shoved my injured hand into my pants pocket and pushed through the crowd. You'd think I'd have left the factory horrified and ashamed, but I walked home with a smile pinned to my jaw. I felt incredible. Waves of euphoria rushed through my body and collected in my fingertips. I was close. I was so very close. I was thankful, but not entirely surprised. Maybe I mangled Grace's tongue and she couldn't speak. Maybe she didn't want the law snooping around the factory. The reason didn't matter. All that mattered was what I planned on doing next. Aaron was exhausted and turned in early. Leela had been a handful, apparently. Again, I was thankful, and I didn't bother asking questions. It felt like the world was paving the way, removing every barrier, keeping me on a certain course, a path that could be easily confused for fate. Once I was sure my family was asleep, I left to find Mateo. The city was eerily quiet. I jogged from block to block, without the urban white noise I was accustomed to, the blaring sirens and the distant music and the drunken chatter of passers-by. The night was silent and black, like the river in the mangrove forest I may have drowned in. It was unnerving, but not enough to send me home, not even enough to slow me down. The euphoria I'd experienced earlier had completely disappeared. The throbbing in my fingertips resurfaced, worse than ever. The pain was severe enough that I needed to cover my mouth with my uninjured hand and muffle a wail. I was approaching Mateo's alley, and I didn't want the noise to scare him off. My wail gradually died down, and the pain briefly subsided, but as I pulled my palm away, I caught a glimpse of fingertips in the murky glow of a street lamp. They were swollen. Pockets of clear fluid stretched the skin to its absolute limit in some places, surpassing it in others, creating paper-cut-sized slits that leaked blood-tinged fluid. What the hell was happening to me? Better yet, where the fuck was my head? I was skulking through the city in the dead of night, presumably unemployed, with a sick kid at home to, what? Commune with Valera through the flesh of some poor man. Yes, a voice in my mind said. That's exactly what I was going to do. That voice grew louder, and the impulse grew stronger, and eventually my legs began moving again. I wasn't jogging anymore, I was sprinting. Angry drivers blasted their horns as I raced across busy streets. I could have been hit, but I didn't care. I was focused. I was close. Mateo lived behind a local coffee shop. My heart sang when I saw their sign at the end of the block. I slowed my pace, steadied my breathing, and crept into the alleyway. A figure lay motionless atop a heated vent. Steam rose from beneath them, caressing their outline, giving them a shape in the inky darkness. His foot is necrotic, I reminded myself. Dead tissue means dead nerves. I might frighten him, but he won't feel any pain. I knelt down beside him, mesmerized by the vibrations radiating across his naked shin. I plunged my swollen fingertips into his flesh. There was resistance, much more than I anticipated, then warmth licking my fingertips and a high-pitched, guttural scream, not the scream of an old man. The figure scrambled away from me. I caught a glimpse of their face in the moonlight. It was a young man with long hair and a deep scar transecting one of their eyebrows. They bolted from me, and I didn't give chase. The mistake was sobering. I terrorized and maimed a stranger for nothing. Absolutely nothing. My stomach heaved. I stumbled to my feet and fled from the alleyway. Salty tears stung my eyes. My mind seemed irreparably fractured. As I bolted home, it kept flipping back and forth between two opposing conclusions. I was broken, lost, and completely insane. No, that's not it. I was given a gift, baptized in secret waters. I could commune with Valera. I could tell her I loved her, tell her I was sorry, and I was close. I just needed to keep trying. When I slinked through the front door, nothing had changed. No winner had been decided. It felt like I was being torn apart from the inside out. I staggered through our home, gripping my head with both hands like my skull would fall apart if I didn't hold it together. I pushed open our bedroom door and stepped through. Aaron was snoring, sound asleep. He'd help me. I'd wake him up, show him my fingers, tell him about Melchiah, beg for his forgiveness, and... I stopped at the side of our bed and stood still. His entire body appeared to be vibrating. Every inch of visible skin was churning, silently swaying, undulating with Valera's voice, especially his eyelids, which rippled like the tide before a storm, graceful and treacherous. I reached both hands out. I hovered a thumb over each eyelid. She's in there. Valera's in his flesh, too. My mind demanded my muscles press down. Not hard enough to kill him, just hard enough to sunder his naked flesh, to rip him open and baptize his viscera. Yes, a voice inside me screamed. My thumbs shook. I was about to give in. I could practically feel the greenlit impulse flying down my nervous system. But before it arrived at my thumbs, my eyes landed on my empty ring finger. The memory of pawning my engagement ring flashed through my mind. Disbelief surged through my body. Why the fuck would I do something so cruel? That's not who I am. That's not how Valera raised me to be. My muscles relaxed. I moved my hands away. My mind felt clear for the first time in weeks, and I came to a realization. There's something dangerous living inside me, and it came from Peru. I remained in control, sipping stale coffee at the kitchen table, determining what to do next. The emergency room seemed like a safe choice, but some part of me resisted. They won't understand. They'll think I'm insane. They'll lock me away. Of course, the question became, is that really what I think, or is that a suggestion from the thing inside me? A way to prevent me from getting help. A shrill noise erupted from my cell phone. I nearly jumped out of my skin, dropping my mug in the process. It shattered on the kitchen tile, launching ceramic shrapnel in every direction. "Oh, for fuck's sake," I whispered, pulling the device from my pocket. Based on the sound, I assumed it was an Amber Alert. It wasn't. The notification read, "Emergency. Alert system. Contiguous disease warning. For your area until further notice. Remain indoors. Click. Hear or turn to channel 8 for details." A sour dread swept through my gut. I raced into the living room, turned on the television, and flipped to channel 8. There was a series of photographs on screen, squeezed between the news anchor and a banner that read, "OUT break of a noun, contagion. Victims assaulted others before disease proved fatal." To my profound horror, I saw a man with a scar across his eyebrow, and a large woman with gray hair and close-set eyebrow, and a large woman with gray hair and close-set eyes. There were 4 other pictures, but I didn't recognize any of them. Originally thought to be under the influence due to their erratic behavior, health officials are now reporting that the perpetrators were likely suffering from some novel, rabies-like infection, though they refuse to provide additional details for the time being. I felt someone tugging at my shirt sleeve. I spun around, heart pounding, relieved to just see a groggy Layla rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "When did we leave the park, Mommy?" I asked her to repeat herself, but the question didn't change. I said, "When did we leave the park? We were there, now we're here. It doesn't make much sense. I don't remember the in-betweens." My heart fell through the floor. She didn't recall the previous 24 hours. She had amnesia. My eyes slowly drifted to the band-aid on her knee. I reached out a damp, trembling hand and peeled it off. There was a small, crescent-shaped trench over her kneecap. I carefully hovered my swollen finger above it. A perfect fit. I'm starting to believe my mom abandoned Valera and me for a very specific reason. I think she was creating distance, keeping us away from Peru and from herself. Because I'm infected with something from my mother's country. Something that wants to spread. Something that infiltrates your mind. Something that would have said anything to convince me to plunge my diseased fingers into other people's flesh. Worst of all, I've given it to my daughter too. Compared to my manager and the man in the alley, we seem to react differently to whatever this infection is. For whatever reason, it doesn't kill us. I suspect the truth is hidden in our bloodline. God, Leela's a smart kid. Empathic too. She picked up on my distress almost immediately, even if she didn't understand it. She hugged my leg, peered up at me with her pale blue eyes, and asked, "So, what now?" I swallowed my despair and forced a smile. I don't know, love. The pain in my fingertips was worsening. I was terrified for Leela. The pain was coming for her too. All I know is, whatever we do, we'll do it together. I picked her up and started walking towards the door. And I won't leave your side again, okay? Promise? My smile grew. For the first time since Valera's death, it was real. Yes, Leela, I promise. When you suffer from schizoaffective disorder, you get used to visual hallucinations at some point. They do not happen all the time, and when you stay on top of your medications and appointments, they become rather rare. However, medications are not cures. Breakthrough symptoms still occur. You might hear a voice that is not there, or you might see the occasional shadow person in your peripheral vision. What you might consider normal anxiety can escalate to paranoid suspicions with no precedent. Sometimes it is just a stressful week, and you just need to check in with your therapist, or perhaps you need to tinker with your meds. But when you have been living with this your whole life, you learn to be functional in spite of it. Well, I thought this time was going to be just another normal period of breakthrough psychosis. But I do not know what normal is anymore, if there is any hope, or if I am safe. It began with the shadow people, as I said. I was already used to that. Sure, I can still get caught off guard and startled by them, but on the whole, I was not worried for myself. I was having a long week, working extra hours at the warehouse, struggling to go to sleep. No big deal. Then, one day, while at the loading dock, I thought I heard my supervisor speaking to me, but when I turned around, there was nobody there. I just laughed at myself and told myself to go to sleep at an early time that night. And then, the smiles. I will admit, no matter how many times I have experienced this, they unsettle me every time. The way they appear is hard to describe. It is not like in movies where a hallucination occupies physical space. It is more like reality warps to accommodate the existence of the smiling face, and then they disappear as quickly as they appear, as if your own mind is gaslighting you. I called my psychiatrist and made an appointment immediately. Dealt with several days of voices and smiling faces until I could get in, tell her everything that was going on, and have my doses increased. The problem with dose increases is that they do not take effect immediately, so I continued living with the hallucinations while feeling groggy from the new prescriptions. Eventually, things felt like they were calming down, and then one morning I woke up. There she was, standing at my bedside. Corpse-like, had turned at an unnatural angle, eyes glaring right at me with an uncanny smile. She did not move or say anything. She just stood there staring unblinkingly. I immediately closed my eyes and shook my head, convincing myself that it was not real. But when I opened my eyes again, there she still stood at the foot of my bed. Eventually, the shock washed over me, and I did my best to ignore her presence, though I was still shaking. I got up, trying not to look in her direction, and did my best to get on with my day. But when I went to the downstairs bathroom, there she was, standing there in the same pose, with the same unnatural grin. I rushed to get dressed and ran out to my car. I hurried to the distribution center, holding in my bladder to use the restroom elsewhere, debating whether I was hallucinating or my house was haunted. Then I looked into my rearview mirror. There she was, sitting in my back seat. I almost crashed the vehicle at that moment, but managed to collect myself just enough to focus and ignore the entity sitting behind me. I convinced myself that I had just gone off the rails again and made my way to work. A few cigarettes and 2 cups of coffee later, I eventually collected myself. The hallucination lost its shock value, and I was able to carry on in spite of it. I figured I would just call my psychiatrist again, or if things got too bad, there was always the hospital option. Thank God for FMLA. The workday went uneventfully, and I got used to her presence, until finally she started moving towards me. I was frozen in panic and did not know what to do. I do not remember what happened next, as I blacked out from the absolute terror, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, all cut up and bleeding everywhere. My coworkers immediately rushed in to help me. I will not forget the look of absolute horror on their faces as they wrenched a bloody box cutter from my hand. I had nothing to say in defense of myself. What could I even say to them? That some undead girl who only I could see cut me up and framed me? Or that I self-harmed in a fit of psychosis? Both sound equally crazy. The ambulance came and took me away. My supervisor just gave me a knowing look. This was not my first rodeo at this job. Now, when you arrive at the emergency room for mandatory psychiatric admission, you basically lose your rights. I could not really speak for myself. All my belongings were taken away, and I just resigned myself to all of it. Some of the ER staff recognized me, again, not my first rodeo. After a long day and night in the ER and some benzos that probably did nothing, they finally moved me upstairs to the observation unit. I recognized the psychiatrist from my last visit there. I told him straight up what had been happening in the last week. The hallucinations, the recent dose adjustment, and the sudden appearance of the corpse girl, and how it felt like she had come and attacked me. I even admitted that I knew what it looked like, and that I probably hurt myself in a psychotic fit. For a few days during my mandatory hold, things seemed to be all right. My meds were adjusted again, I did my daily sessions, worked on art with the crappy supplies they had, and got friendly with some of the other patients there. And then, she appeared again. This time it was not a freeze, I screamed. Psych wards are a weird place, where you can feel safe to be your unfiltered, unstable self. I was screaming, ducking behind the table, and throwing colored pencils at the corpse as it smiled at me, taunting me with her presence. Nurses immediately ran in, reassuring me that I was safe and removing me from the common room. After hyperventilating for a few minutes, I eventually calmed down. I told them what I saw. The same thing I had been seeing for the last few days, and it would not go away. The figure continued to watch me from behind the windows of the common room as the nurses carried me away. That night, I struggled to sleep, even on a heavy dose of multiple antipsychotics. Then, suddenly, I opened my eyes to see her again, bent over the bed, staring right down at me with the same unnaturally wide grin. She moved her hand up to my face, revealing sharp claws, and then sharp pain. There was a delay between the shock and the pain, and my screaming response to alert the night shift nurses. The figure was now gone, but my stomach was bleeding. And clutched in my hands? A colored pencil from the common room. Of course. The nurse wrestled the pencil out of my hands, and I was immediately taken down to the emergency room to get stitched up. I was recommended for ECT next. The psychiatrist told me my psychosis was treatment resistant. At this point, I was ready for anything if it meant not seeing that thing again. After several rounds of ECT, it felt like progress was finally being made. Blocks of memory seemed lost, but that was a small price to pay if it meant being rid of her. It was a long month in the hospital before I finally got to go home. My supervisor already took care of my FMLA for me, and my coworkers were happy to see me better. I checked back in with my therapist and psychiatrist to let them know things were looking up again. Then, it happened one day at the warehouse. I thought I heard a coworker speak to me, but nobody was there. Then, when I turned back to resume what I was doing, there she was again, head tilted, unnaturally wide smile, and her clawed fingers pointed forward.